Before I get to the next topic, I want to ask a question. I love asking this question. Because we're going to be talking about Allah, the God of Islam. Who is Allah? I want to ask you a question. When we're talking about the God of the Bible, should Christians ever use the word Allah to refer to God? I heard some no. I heard some, I don't know. Anybody say yes? Actually, that was a trick question. I set you guys up for that because, and I'll tell you why. Because that's usually the common response. We should never say Allah when referring to the God of the Bible. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. In Arabic, and Arabic is the language that the Quran was written in. Muslims believe that Arabic is the language of God. In the Arabic language, there's only one word to represent God, and that word is Allah. What that means is even in Christian churches, if you go to an Arabic Christian church here in the States today, you will hear them singing praises to Allah. Are you aware of that? Did you know that? In an Arabic Christian church, and I've been to many of them, they will sing praises to Allah. And when they're reading their Bible, and God's name is mentioned in the Bible, they call him Allah. Now, simply because Arabic Christians call God Allah, and Muslims call God Allah, does that mean that they are the same God because they share the same name? See, this is what we hear all the time from politicians and from our Muslim apologists and others who are rather ignorant on this subject. Muslims and Christians worship the same God, right? That's what we hear. Do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? Well, Muslims call their God Allah. Arabic Christians call their God Allah. Does that mean they're the same God? It doesn't mean they're the same God any more than my wife's name is Christine. And if there's another woman in here named Christine, that doesn't make her my wife simply because she shares the same name. Does that make sense? So you have to move beyond the labels. You have to move beyond the titles and actually look at the attributes that define who Allah is. So we're going to take a look at some of those attributes of the Allah of Islam and see if he matches the attributes of the God of our Bible. I think you're going to see something very, very interesting, very distinctive. I want you guys to be able to answer this question next time you're asked, do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? Let's take a look at him. When we look at the God of Islam, we see something quite interesting. Allah, what is he like? Well, first of all, in some sense, the attributes of Allah compared to the attributes of the God of our Bible. He's omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. He's all-powerful, he's all-knowing, and he's everywhere, as he's described in the Quran. But this is about where the similarities end. When you look at the God of Islam, he seems to be a rather different God. The God of Islam. In Islam, there's absolutely no free will. God of Islam controls absolutely everything. Everything that happens on earth is of God's will. You'll hear a Muslim use this term, inshallah, or inshallah, inshallah. If God wills, I'll be there tomorrow, inshallah. I'll be there tomorrow if God wills. And what they mean, and what the Quran means by this, and we'll look at this in a moment, is that everything that happens on earth is a result of God's direct intervention, is a result of God's will. Let me read you a quotation from the Muslim theologian Risala al-Bakavi. It'll kind of drive this point home. It'll emphasize this point. It says, not only can he, speaking of Allah, do anything, he is actually the only one who does anything. When a man writes, it is Allah who has created in his mind the will to write. Allah at the same time gives the power to write, then brings about the motion of the hand and the pen and the appearance upon the paper. All things are passive. Allah alone is active. Now, we talk about being in God's will, but can we ever be outside of God's will? Sure, absolutely. Do we have free will? Do we have free choice? Yeah, we do. We have free choice. We can disobey God. We can act on our own free choice. In Islam, according to Islamic theology and according to the Quran, God controls everything. God is the grand puppet master, and we are nothing more than the puppets at his beck and command. He's up there pulling the purse strings, or the puppet strings. God is the one that controls everything. The God of Islam, Allah is an impersonal God. You cannot possibly hope to know him. Muslims say Allah is so transcendent, so distant, so removed from his creation, there's no way we can ever hope to know him at a personal level. He's transcendent. He's unknowable. He's unknowable and he's impersonal. Do we have a personal God? Yeah, we do. What's he ask us to call him? Abba, Father, right? We're his children. Children and father have a personal relationship. In Islam, there is no father-child relationship. The relationship of a Muslim to Allah is that of a slave to a master. And that's the only relationship you can use to actually talk about what this like. Remember, Allah's the grand puppet master, and we're the ones moving according to the strings that he pulls. We're the slaves, and he's the master. So the God of Islam is an impersonal God, cannot be known. The God of Islam also forgives people of their sins capriciously. He can choose who he wants to forgive their sins, and he can choose whom he doesn't want to forgive their sins. If a Muslim asks for their sins to be forgiven, they have absolutely no assurance that God will actually forgive their sins. In Surah 5, verse 18, when I say Surah of the Quran, Surah is chapter. The Quran is about 114 chapters, so Surah is chapter. Surah 5, chapter 5, verse 18 says, "Nay, you are human beings of those who he has created, and he forgives whom he wills, and he punishes whom he wills." He forgives whom he wills, and he punishes whom he wills. If a Muslim asks for forgiveness of their sin, they have absolutely no assurance that their sin is going to be forgiven. It gets worse. What I want to impart to you guys, and what I'm hoping you're beginning to get a sense of, is the absolute despair and hopelessness that Muslims find themselves in. They have no hope at all. God forgives whom he wills and chooses whom he doesn't want to forgive. Allah cannot have a son. God cannot possibly have a son. In fact, this is probably one of the biggest hurdles for a Muslim to get across when they're talking to Christians. How can God have a son? This whole issue of the Trinity. How do you get beyond that with a Muslim? But God cannot possibly have a son. For God to have a son implies that God came down and had physical relations and somehow produced a physical offspring. This is what the Quran suggests. They don't understand what the Bible means when we say son of God, the term son of God. It's a relationship of authority. It's an authority relationship, not a physical relationship. So the God of Islam cannot have a son. The God of Islam cannot be known. I talked about that a moment ago. He's unknowable. The God of Islam cannot love. He's not a loving God. The Muslims have 99 names for God in the Quran, and not one of those names is the name of love. Now, is our God a loving God? Does he love you? Does he tell you he loves you? Do you know he loves you? See, a Muslim can't answer that. They have absolutely no sense that God loves them. Because the term for love, be related to God, is not something that Muslims are familiar with. It's not there. And why is that? Why is that? Because Allah is said to be perfect and complete in and of himself. And in order for God to possess the title of love, it would require him to require something else to define who he is. Think about this for a moment. Follow me with this. What does the term love mean? It means there's a relationship between two people, right? You have to have two people in the equation in order for the word love to make any sense. You have to have a lover, and you have to have somebody on whom that love is bestowed. So two people have to enter into the equation for love to make any sense at all. But the God of Islam, before we were created, before in eternity past, before his creation, the God of Islam, Allah, was absolutely singular. This is the definition of Allah in Islam. It's called Tawheed, absolute singularity. Not a triunity, absolute singularity, Tawheed. God in eternity past was all by himself. All by himself. So if he's all by himself, how does love make any sense? Whom was he loving? You see? This is a beautiful thing because when we talk to Muslims, we can actually talk to them about the Trinity using this whole concept. You see, our God in eternity past had a triune relationship, had a loving relationship. God the Father loving on God the Son, God loving on God the Holy Spirit, in a loving communion in eternity past. Love was possible. In Islam, love was not possible with God in singularity. God cannot said to be a loving God in Islam. The respected 10th century Islamic scholar, Al-Ghazali, said this. He said, Allah cannot be said to have a need or an experience of need. It is therefore impossible that Allah should love. In other words, Allah is so perfect and complete, he needs nothing. And since love requires an object on which to bestow that love, God cannot be said to have a need. Therefore, God cannot be a loving God. God can't require something else to define who he is. And that would be a requirement if we were to say God is a loving God. So God cannot love. Allah cannot love. Are we talking about the same God here, the God of the Bible, the God of Islam? Are they the same God? Not even close. The Allah of Islam, God of Islam, is responsible for both good and evil. The God of Islam is responsible for both good and evil. In Surah 4, verse 78, it's talking about some people who came up and were trying to chide Muhammad. And these are disbelievers. It says, if some good befalls them, the disbelievers, they say, this is from Allah. But if it's evil, they say, this is from you, Muhammad. Evil comes from you, Muhammad. So God tells Muhammad, say, all things are from Allah. In other words, good comes from Allah, and evil comes from Allah as well. The God of Islam is responsible for both good and evil. Is our God responsible for evil? Does he cause evil to exist? No. Evil is a result of man's disobedience to God. Our God doesn't cause evil to exist, but the God of Islam does. The God of Islam leads some people in the path of righteousness and leads other people astray. He chooses whom he will lead and guide in the path of righteousness, and he deliberately chooses whom he's going to lead astray. Did you hear that? The God of Islam intentionally leads people down the wrong path. He intentionally leads people astray. Surah 4, verse 119, I will mislead them and create in them false desires. Surah 18, verse 17, such are among the signs of Allah. He whom Allah guides is rightly guided, but he whom Allah leads astray, for him will thou find no protector to lead him to the right way. Surah 16, verse 93, if Allah so willed, he could make you all one people, but he leaves straying whom he pleases, and he guides whom he pleases. So the God of Islam deliberately leads people down the wrong path. Does our God do that? Does your God lead you astray? No way. So we're talking about two different gods here. Finally, the God of Islam is called the greatest of deceivers. The greatest of deceivers. Surah 3, verse 54 says, speaking about those who disbelieve, the polytheists, the disbelievers, it says, they plotted, the disbelievers plotted, and Allah plotted too, and Allah is the best of plotters. Now that word is translated plotters. Some English translations translate it schemers or planners or plotters or something along that line. But in the original Arabic, that word actually means deceiver, and it's properly translated deceiver, and it's actually a deception with a very negative connotation. It's an evil kind of deception. Allah is known as the best of deceivers. Now think about this for a moment. Let's take a look at particularly these last three attributes of the God of Islam, Allah of Islam. He's responsible for evil. He leads people astray. And he's the best of deceivers. Does that sound like anybody familiar to you? We're not talking about the same God. We're not talking about the same God.